this week as we close out this ordinary time and we kind of celebrate in a special way, there's Fat Tuesday that you do before Wednesday, which is a day of abstinence and also of fasting as well. And since we don't meet on Tuesday of next week, we're making this Fat Wednesday pretty much. No, Fat Wednesday week basically is what it is. But it's good that we're preparing already for Lent and perhaps to observe Lent in a more special way. And so as agrupados and going beyond the minimum. Yeah, don't eat meat on Fridays. Yes, that's what we're called to do. That's all the church requires us to do. Well, let's not do just the minimum here. And so as we get together, also our meal or our get-togethers would also reflect that we're going to be in Lent. And so, as you heard already mentioned before, that we will have the kind of a lighter fare, pretty much not a full meal as we've been having for dinner here, and also abstaining from meat at the same time. Yeah, Friday's the one to abstain from meat. Well, nothing says you can't do it on Wednesday either. That's an extra sacrifice that we do. We're in a time when so many things are being suspended. Still the COVID thing, we still keep on canceling things, adjusting things, not doing things because of the COVID. Well, let's do something different. Let's do something be proactive in that sense to bring back that Lent and bring us into the consciousness that we're in a time of Lent. And so our fare would be a lot lighter when we come in. And yeah, maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe, we can do better. Yeah, we can, but we're doing it on purpose in order to be able to not only hold back and offer that little sacrifice, which is that abstain from meat, but also in what we eat, the quality of what we eat, the quantity of what we eat. And so we'll make up for it tonight, but next week we enter that Lent in full force. This whole week, we've been hearing from the book of Genesis, and this is one of those underrated books I love. I can never get enough of Genesis, because Pope Benedict, before he became Pope actually, Cardinal Ratzinger, had written a very short, well, it's not really a book, but it was a collection of sermons, 10 days worth of sermons, which are exactly the reflection on the Genesis that shows up in the Mass over these days. And in 1977, I think he wrote these sermons that were put together into a small book, and often I like to read from them during the retreats. And he mentions that the book of Genesis is one of those books that unfortunately has been very much lost and discarded in modern culture. For one, we can say that there was this familiarity once with Genesis. And I think if I mention Genesis, you already know what is being said in there. We could almost recite the whole book from memory. We've heard it and we're familiar with it. Although we can't say that many present generations are so familiar with them. The other day, some weeks ago, I was watching the Jeopardy, the tournament of the college tournament. And they did have one column, one category that was Bible. And there was one of these students that was cleaning out the place. I mean, he did not let anyone answer in the first round. He had every single thing. And I noticed that he skipped one category. He left the Bible for last. And then finally, I mean, and again, like he had like $7,000 and everybody else had like $20. It had barely anything. Nobody could answer. He was just beating them to it. But then it got to the Bible. And he totally bottomed out in there. He could not answer one thing. And the other student who came, obviously from one of these Christian colleges, he wiped that category down. But he was the only one. And it's just the answers that the guy who knew every single category except Bible would miss the most easiest things, And he created him from the dust or from the mud that comes from the water and the ground. Who is this talking about? Moses? He didn't know. I mean, Moses was his answer for every single thing in there. And he rose on the third day. Moses? He didn't know. He had completely no idea of the Bible. I was hearing also in a podcast from Bishop Barron a couple of days ago that, again, this familiarity, it was a cultural familiarity. We'd make a lot of references in our speech. Even politicians would mention the Bible, especially Genesis, because everyone was familiar with it. Not so anymore. You get lost in these details. It's strange that in a time when we're supposed to be exposed more to the Bible, we know less about it. And in a time when there was less exposure, people seem to know more about it. And what does this Genesis tell us? In a certain way, it's been descartado, no? A lot of times people take this book and say, well, you can't take that seriously. I mean, you think the world was created in 7 days? You think man came from mud and water? Science tells you otherwise. But we lose track of how to read this book, and this is what Ratzinger is telling us here. Remember that the Bible's several books. It's not one book. Yeah, we have one edition of the Bible, but it's several books put together. And the same way, and I tell the students that you don't read poems or read songs the way you do a science textbook. Well, it's the same thing with the Bible. Certain parts of this Bible are poetry. Certain parts of this Bible are allegory, are story. Other parts are law books, and, well, you read it like a law book. And so the way I don't take a song, and a song that could be conveying something true, I don't take the song literally, but I do take the truth of what it's conveying. The same thing we have to do with the Bible, especially with the book of Genesis. It gets lost in translation. If you know Hebrew and you read the Hebrew part, it starts to rhyme actually. It's part of a larger song, a larger poem. And all this poem is trying to tell us through allegory, through symbolism, and the best way you can understand is that life comes from God. So many ways we can say things. I mean, think about it. Songs. How many ways can you say I love you in a song without actually saying the word I love you? I mean, it's there in some of the greater songs that we have. And so this is what it's saying in here over and over again. It's the constant theme. Don't forget, what generates life is God and nothing else. We hear man being created here. And how does man receive life? From God, not from himself. All the things of nature have been established by now. As we hear, heaven and earth has been constituted. Water was just starting to gurgle up from the ground, yet life itself had not started yet. Life comes from God. It's the opposite of, I guess, what we call animation. Sure, we can animate things. We can make things move, and there's a trick that we did when we dissected a frog in high school. You run an electrical current and you make the legs move. And you say, oh, back from the dead. Well, you animated it, but it's not alive. Frankenstein, the whole thing is, can you make it alive? And he creates a corpse, but can't make it alive. I mean, the monster is that thing that comes out of that. Life itself is not animation, although the word itself, if we look at it, means kind of what we're talking about, is meter una anima dentro. Only God can do that, can animate. But it's not from our own. And since we are not the origin and source of life, we participate in it, but we're not the source. Then man does not determine life. Man, in a certain way, cannot govern his own life in an absolute way. We are given that task and that gift of also co-creating and assisting the work of creation with God. However, it's not all on us. Many times we probably know families and couples that have difficulty in conceiving a child. It's almost a reminder, life begins with God. You could do everything right and you could get all the steps right, but at the end of the day, that life comes from God. The second thing that it tells us here right at the end, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. Well, it sounds a little strange, but it's telling us that then man, this man that's created, who owes his life to God, there's another thing that he owes, determining what is right and wrong. It is something that is given to him, not something that originates in him. Yes, we use our reason to figure out right and wrong. But what is the principle of right and wrong? Where do we get it from? Where does it start? We didn't make it up ourselves. You don't get to make it up either. But it's something that God himself has planted in us. It's the result of that anima, of that life that we have in us. And so the principle of right and wrong is not for us to apoderarnos, to take it and do whatever we want with it. It's kind of what they're doing now a lot of things. Look at some of the legislation and the change of language and thought and all the stuff, especially in the gender bending things. It's as if we are exactly trying to do that. We define what is right and wrong according to our image. We can pretend to govern life and put life where it should not be in and take life away where it should be. That's the sin of the time, I think. And so, if anything we can take from this book, the book of Genesis today, is that those two principles that are repeated over and over again in here. Man receives his life from God, and man receives what is right and wrong, knows what is right and wrong, only through God. It's not for him to change. It's not for him to alter. May we remember that, especially in this year to come and in the times that we are living in. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.